Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is a job that I absolutely love because these are dahlia tubers that have been stored over the winter in a cool, dark place, which happens actually to be the tool shed. And we store our dahlias in old newspaper, which we found works really well, but you could use sand or old potting compost, anything that will provide a form of insulation plus retain some moisture. So we open them out, and there you are, look at that. That's pretty good. A mass of really firm tubers. This is a variety called Tambura, and the flowers are fantastic. They're an explosion of crimson, perfect for the dual garden. And although at the moment this does look a bit brown and a bit dried, as though there's nothing in it for the gardener, I can tell you this is summer waiting to happen. On today's programme, we join Adam as he reveals the dramatic changes that he's made to his garden over winter.
Well, I got a little bit carried away. So what was going to be a small project turned into being a massive project.
Francis visits ecologist Dave Goulson's garden to discover how he's made it a haven for wildlife.
Gardens can be fantastic places for insects. There's potential to have literally thousands of species of insect living in your back garden.
And I will be preparing the mound for a new ambitious project that I want to get stuck into. When you take your dahlia tubers out, the thing to do is to give them a good squeeze. Feel the tubers, and if they feel firm, then that's exactly what you're looking for. If one or two are hollow and they've dried out completely or they're a bit rotten, take them out. But that is in really good nick. So I'm going to pot that up as it is, ready for planting out after the last frost. So I get some potting compost, and if you can, add a little bit of garden compost to it so they get a bit of oomph, a bit of goodness to start them off. And then sit that on there like that. And you can see I haven't put too much in the pot because I want them to be buried and cover them over. So we've just got the stems sticking out. So I will now water that. Remember to put the label in, like that, and put it somewhere frost-free and light. So that's going in the greenhouse. But you can also grow dahlias from seed. And this year, I'm going to grow two different varieties. I've got Figaro mixed, which are a dwarf dahlia. So really good for growing in a container, on a windowsill, on a balcony, and also cactus hybrid mix, and they're widely available. So if you want to grow them with me, we can all grow them together, but you don't quite know what you're going to get because seed never comes completely true, whereas when you buy a dahlia as tubers, you know what you're going to get. It'll be a variety and you can guarantee its colours. Right, I like to use seed trays rather than pots, but any container will do perfectly well, but do bear in mind it must have good drainage. I'm using our seed mix, but any peat-free compost will do perfectly well. Make sure it's level. I'm going to start sowing the cactus hybrid mixed. And cactus dahlias have these wonderful pointed petals, very often curled in on themselves, which are really dramatic. And I have said this many times, but it really is worth taking trouble spacing seeds evenly. Cover them over with a sprinkle of compost, like that. And by gently firming it, you're making sure the compost is in really good contact with the seed, and that will help germination. Water them and put them somewhere warm to germinate. I will put these on a heated bench, but a windowsill above a radiator will do perfectly well. Don't let them dry out and they should germinate in about 10 days. Now, the reason I love growing dahlias is because they add an exotic splash of colour to the late summer and autumn garden. But if you don't have a garden, you can still have exotic plants, as we found when we paid a visit to East Finchley.
I think that houseplants and cacti and succulents can be just so funny. They sort of look like these grumpy old men in the corner, and then suddenly they'll give you a brilliant flower. And I just think that that flamboyantness is hilarious. My name is Daisy Hale, and I have a cacti and succulent collection. If I go past a plant shop, I can't help but look inside. And I also do tend to stage interventions with people if I think that their plant is going into ill health, and will just take it away. The first plant that I ever had was an aloe vera. Well, I think I was about 14 at the time, and just kept it around, and it did really, really well in my house all through my teenage years. And then when I moved to London, I brought it with me, and I guess that's sort of where the collecting started. I'm a theatre producer, and I also work in cabaret and a big variety of shows across London. I think that the cacti and succulents can reflect my personality. They are weird and wonderful, a little bit like me and the work that I do. Every plant has its own personality, and I try and name them to match that personality. This is Penny, my Chinese money plant. Penny was a present from my partner for Christmas, and I think that she is just absolutely gorgeous. My top tip with Chinese money plants is once a week I'll turn the plant slightly. It will make sure that sunlight is being reached on all sides of the plant. I love dinosaurs. When I was younger, I was obsessed with dinosaurs. Thought I was going to be a paleontologist. And this is actually my favourite dinosaur as well, so it's even better. This is my favourite houseplant, Pearl, my string of pearls. They just sort of look really like elegant and sophisticated and beautiful, and I just love the way that in my bedroom window it catches the light. They look really, really gorgeous. And I like how they sort of go from tiny, tiny little pearls all the way up to the much larger ones. And I'm really hoping that I can get it to flower. So this is Bunny, bunny-eared cactus, which is part of the prickly pear family. And I've actually got some new growth on Bunny, which is really exciting. And I think they look like fuzzy little caterpillars on top, which is quite fun. I've got quite a large range of cacti and succulents here. Some of the more common ones would probably be this one here. Its common name is Eatie's fingers, and you can see why. You should always dust your plants to make sure that no sort of bacteria builds on the surface of the plant, which might damage it. The little heart-shaped plant is a Hoya Kerry, which is a Japanese plant. My probably most unusual plant that I have is this Miramar halubi, which is native to Africa. It looks like sort of a creepy little potato type thing, but actually it's part of the morning glory family, and when it flowers you get these really beautiful pinky purple flowers just once a year, and I just find that the contradiction of this really creepy looking potato and these really beautiful flowers hilarious. I find looking after the plants very calming, and there's a certain safety almost to looking after houseplants because they are so widely cultivated across the world that if I do something wrong, I can try again. Succulents and cacti can live for a long time without water, but I don't let them get too dry. Something that I really like to do is mist them either once or twice a week. When I actually want to water them, a really fun thing to do is to gather them all up, plonk them in the bath and give them a proper good shower. My plants bring me a lot of joy. I like the caring of them. I like that they're always there. For someone like a young professional in London, in rented accommodation, you can't always have pets, but you can have plants. And plants are a really lovely way to have something to care for, understand how plants work, all within the confines of your home, which is very comforting, I find. I don't think the collection is finished by any means. I think I'll keep on buying plants for years to come now. And to be honest, I wouldn't want to ever finish it. I want to see what else is out there.
I like the way that for Daisy, her plants are clearly characters that she shares her household with. And I'm one who never used to have houseplants at all, and increasingly I'm getting pleasure from them. And I've got quite a few succulents, which, rather than being in the house, stay here in the greenhouse over winter. Now, across the winter, I haven't watered them once. And you have to remember with succulents that they don't draw on water as they need it with roots in the same way that other plants do. What they do is they draw it up into their stems and into their foliage and store it and then draw on that. So now, as we go into spring and they start growing again, now is the time to give them a water. And having given them a drink, I now don't need to water them again for another month. Now, I know that a lot of people feel that if they rent a property, that at very least it constrains their gardening. They feel they can't plant, they don't know when they'll be moving. But we've had a film from one of our viewers in Coventry who shows that if you do rent, you can garden, and you can garden well.
My name's Helen, and I've rented for a long time, so I do most of my gardening in pots. My grandma was an amazing gardener, and she was a great source of inspiration to me. And she sadly passed away recently, but she lives on in my garden because most of my plants come from plants that she'd thinned out and given some to me, or from cuttings. And that's what gardening's all about for me. It's all about sharing. So last autumn I took cuttings from a rose. It's a beautiful, fragrant climbing rose with pink blooms. And the cuttings seem to have taken really well. So what I'm going to do now is divide these up so that I can pass them on to friends and neighbours. So I've already made a pot up with some peat-free compost, some stones in the bottom for drainage and a little bit of rose food. And I'm very gently going to pull these rose cuttings out because the roots will be very, very delicate. So I very quickly want to get that into a pot. And give it a drink. And that's now ready to pass on. I'm not sure about Monty, but I think my grandma would be quite happy with that.
You needn't worry, Helen. I'm impressed. Looks really good, and it's great that you're taking roses from cuttings because they actually take quite easily. Now, talking of making new plants, now is the perfect time of year to divide and spread snowdrops, and this is called moving them in the green, and basically it means while they're still growing. It's immediately after flowering. And you can do it with bluebells, you can do it with winter aconites, and it's a really good way of getting a nice sea of white snowdrops. So all you have to do, and if you've got knees like mine, a kneeler does help, is take a clump of snowdrops from where you're prepared to move them, and they lift quite easily. So I can either transfer the whole clump, or you can divide them up, which is really easy. All you do is get your thumbs in there, and just ease them apart. There you go. One decent sized clump there, another one, and we've doubled our number of snowdrops at a stroke. Now, if you've got very sandy soil, it's a good idea to have a bucket of garden compost with you and just put a handful in beneath the roots. And that's as much as anything else to act as a sponge to hold moisture. Snowdrops don't like drying out. Pop that in the hole, pull the soil around it, and there you are. And snowdrops, a little bit of shade and plenty of moisture will be very happy. You can see here what looks like a giant snowdrop. In fact, it's rather a small snowflake, leucojum. And I've planted snowflakes along here because they are another of the bulbs that like damp conditions. Moving the snowdrops like this is, for the snowdrop, a very painless transition. But moving them is a gradual job. However, in Adam's garden, he has been doing some rather more dramatic changes over the winter.
If you're anything like me, this has felt like a really long winter. But the sun has come out. Admittedly, it's a little bit windy today and we've already had some rain, but we'll enjoy the sun while it's here. And the garden is starting to come alive. But actually, in reality, I wish you were here a couple of weeks ago. The winter aconites in the woodland have been fantastic. They were followed by the snowdrops. But these have been the stars, the hellebores. And I found myself sort of wandering down here on the warmer days with a cup of coffee in hand and just stopping, because these have been covered in bees. So the moment there's a little bit of sun, you know, they're out and they're on the hunt. They're looking for that early nectar, and more of that flower we can put into our gardens. We're going to provide, you know, not just the joy for us, but ultimately the food for those guys. And I think what's good about this time of year as well is you can still see, you know, if there's any spaces in the garden that maybe need colour or maybe need structure, and that's what we're going to do today. There's one place in particular that needs attention. Last summer, I started building a new terrace next to the gravel garden. Over the winter, I finished that and then hired myself a digger to carve out more space for gravel, plus prepare some footings for a wall that I'm going to build. Good, isn't it? Well, I got a little bit carried away. So what was going to be a small project turned into being a massive project. I'm going to extend the gravel garden, which, if I'm honest, last year was absolutely glorious. Even right through to October, the sun's going down over those trees, it was coming through the grasses, and it was just a beautiful place to be. And I'm now trying to connect, you know, the new space and the old space, but also at the same time, the big viburnum tinus, which has got fantastic flower on it at the moment. I've got to bring that down into the area. And to do that, really, I build the planting very much on layers. So the tree planting goes in first. So if you imagine I've got Amelanchier that sits in the gravel garden there, I've actually added two up here. What I want to do is add winter colour. So I'm getting that in early doors. So up here, I've got a Cornus mass. They're a fantastic, hard-working, small garden tree. You know, got that beautiful flower, but they can be manipulated. You can get them as multi-stemmed, you can get them as single-stemmed, you can clip the tops of them, you can do what you want, really. And then you've got beautiful foliage and a berry. And as they mature, the bark just gets better. But that'll get up and fill that sort of void just up above my sort of head here, and then that will start to connect to the viburnum. I know you've got to use your imagination at the moment. Now I'm going to put a shrub layer all the way through. The first one here is Euonymus alatus, and this is called Blade Runner. And you look at the stems really closely, you can see there's an arrow type feel to it. As it matures, it grows in layers, lovely limey foliage and then the flower to follow. But I want it as a statement as you come through that pathway, just structurally. So all that colour you're adding for the winter doesn't have to be through flower. When it comes to prepping this soil, what we've done so far is added through lots of organic matter. So I've used manure, but I've put some gravel through as well. I think that's quite key when you're putting shrubs in. You put plenty of room around the plant. You're not trying to wedge it into a really tight hole. It will disappear into the background through the summer a little bit, but come next winter, it will really start to come into its own. So now we go over. You've got to see this, honestly. This is Muhlenbeckia Astonii. If that all sounds like a mouthful, try Wiggy Wig Bush. Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? Wiggy Wig Bush, I love that. Just makes you smile. Every time you walk in the garden, you just think Wiggy Wig Bush. It looks incredible. This thing eventually will get to probably about 2 metres by about 2 metres, but I can retain it if I need to. It'll take sun or semi-shade, but for me, it's a showstopper. You know, and I think if you can put 2 or 3 key plants through your space at points where you know you want to pause people, they really can just catch the eye. If you're looking here at the Muhlenbeckia, back across to there's a lovely link to the Carokia, and that's called Sunsplash. So you've got this beautiful sort of dark stem with the foliage that's got slight variation to it, but that then connects to the gravel garden. What I love about those plants is ultimately they can be manipulated. I've seen those grown as hedges, come in all sorts of different foliage colours. So an incredible plant, same conditions though, loves those free draining conditions. So you can start to see that the structure is going into this space, and then the herbaceous plants will come in and it will really come alive. I know we're sat here in March and it all looks a little bit brown, but doesn't it give you hope as to what is to come?
I'm sure that you've been as fascinated as I have been on seeing the way that Adam's garden has developed. And of course, we will be going back there soon to see how things are progressing. Now, last year, we coppiced this area. Now, coppicing means cutting plants on a regular cycle to promote a rash of new shoots, which you then use. And in the case of hazel, which these are, it makes wonderful bean sticks, pea sticks, hazel hurdles, and also thatching spars was a really important use. But you only cut this every 7 or 8 years. This is the 3rd cut we've had since we've been here. And each time you really notice the changes, particularly in the year following, which of course is now. We have this light flooding in, and the result is the floor is bejeweled with beautiful, beautiful primroses. And amongst them are woven in violets. We've got hellebores growing. And very soon the wood anemones will be opening out. And all these plants respond really well to the coppice cycle. Now, we've had a film from a viewer in Dorset, Craig Arborough, who's created a garden that could not be more different to this part of Longmeadow, but it's certainly very beautiful.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is my tiny tropical style garden on the Dorset coast. It's a mid-terrace, relatively new build, and I can walk from one end of the garden in under 10 seconds and almost touch either side if I let down and stretched out. We've managed to squeeze in a deck, a stream, a patio, and several beds. This tiny garden gets sun for most of the day, which is great. It really helps me grow some of these tropical plants. But the plants that float my boat are the shade-loving plants. ferns, begonias and patiens. And for something a bit different, I like to take cuttings from my houseplants to grow on and use as summer bedding outside. This trailing houseplant is Tradescantia. For a shady spot in the summer months, it makes a fantastic foliage plant. And it's got to be one of the easiest plants to take cuttings from. Cut off a piece about 10 centimeters long and make sure you cut below a node, and then strip off the lower leaves. And I like to recycle these small glass jars that the supermarkets sell spices in because they're tall and narrow, so they hold your cutting material upright. At times like this, I'm really grateful that I've got some space to grow plants, even if it's tiny. And I think it's important just to take the time to enjoy it at the moment, and that's what I'm going to do now.
I find that film really inspirational. So please keep sending your films in and inspiring us all. Now here in the wildlife garden, it deliberately looks a bit of a mess. And that's because I haven't cut anything back since last summer. And whilst that may look like untidy gardening to you, to the wildlife in here, it feels like home. It's protection, it's cover, and that's really important. And I won't cut back for another few weeks. The time to cut back is when you start to see new growth coming through strongly. So you're not depriving anything of cover. Now, last week I pruned the dogwood in the damp garden, the cornus. And I kept some of those prunings to use as cuttings here in the wildlife garden. And I've just kept them in water over the last week. And these are the easiest cuttings you will ever make. These and willows strike almost every time. Choose stems about the thickness of a pencil to a finger and cut it below a node. And a node is the point where two side shoots or leaves grow, and you cut them about anything between 6 inches and a foot long and cut the top at an angle. And the reason you do that is simply so you know which is the top and which is the bottom. And then I can just cut that straight so I know it's the bottom below a node, cut that at an angle, there we go. And then you just push them in the ground. That's all you have to do. Put them in quite deep, at least half of it buried if you can. And that will create a thicket of growth, which will be fabulous cover for creatures around the edge of a pond. Now, still to come on today's programme. We meet a gardener who's created a floating floral oasis on her London houseboat.
I really like to explore plants that have uses because, of course, it's lovely for them to be beautiful, but when you're limited for space like I am, it's lovely to get a yield from everything.
And I sow my tomatoes. But first, we've got a chance to see again the visit that Francis made last summer to a garden in West Sussex that is rich in wildlife.
Even on a blustery day, this garden is very busy. There are bees buzzing, butterflies flying all over, and creepy crawlies scurrying through the grass. It's because this garden is the garden of Dave Goulson, a professor of biological science, an author, and an all-round expert on bees. His mission is to attract as many different insects to his garden as possible, to try and help offset the alarming drop in their numbers as a whole. So Dave, tell me about the state of insects in this country.
They're not doing so well, sadly. We know that actually globally insects are in decline. There's a really alarming study from Germany that came out a couple of years ago which showed a 75% drop in flying insect numbers over the last 26 years. We should be worried, you know, particularly bees being in decline because they're vitally important as pollinators of our crops and our flowers and so on. But, you know, it doesn't have to carry on. We can stop it, we can turn it around. And it actually, because insects, they can breed really quickly, they will come back. Not many have gone extinct yet. And if we just provide them with some food and somewhere to live, they'll recover in no time.
Us gardeners really are the key to that recovery. There's more than 22 million gardens in the UK, and insects can thrive in even the tiniest of outdoor spaces.
I have a perhaps slightly fanciful dream of them all being bee-friendly, wildlife-friendly. Gardens can be fantastic places for insects. There's potential to have literally thousands of species of insect living in your back garden.
Well, can you talk me through some of the things that gardeners can do to actively help the lives of insects?
The most obvious thing, really, is don't spray pesticides in your garden. There's no point in... You can't have an insect-friendly garden if it's full of poison. So skip the pesticides, really simple thing, and plant lots of insect-friendly flowers. And insects will appear as if by magic. It's amazing. Just, you know, one lavender bush in a pot on a balcony, and somehow the bees will sniff it out.
Dave's approach is to use a lot of normal herbaceous garden plants along with natives or British wildflowers and their close relations. So talk me through what plants are here and what they're doing for the insects.
So we've got basically a mix intended to attract and feed as many different insects as possible. The non-natives include things like the giant hyssop there, which is fantastic for bees, and catmint and lavender, which are all, I mean, of course, classic kind of bee plants, and they're beautiful, and, you know, I couldn't live with the garden without them, to be honest. But I've also got lots of natives, and I think there are lots of things to be said for growing native flowers. So marjoram is a great one for attracting a range of insects. There's honeybees, I can see a green bottle, there's various hoverflies on there, and if it weren't quite so windy, there'd be butterflies on there.
But he's also filled a pot with bird's foot trefoil, a plant normally found in meadows, because it's a favourite for breeding insects as well as hungry ones.
It attracts lots of bees, it flowers for ages and ages, and also, because it's native, it's the food plant of the caterpillars of the common blue butterfly and the burnet moth, both of them gorgeous insects to attract into the garden. So, you know, why would you plant pelargoniums in a pot when you could have beautiful bird's foot trefoil?
I have to say, I've never seen it in a pot, and it does look amazing. I do like pelargoniums as well, though. The key is having a combination. Plants that work for insects, plants that work for us, and lots that we're both keen on. And once the insect numbers rise, it brings even more joy, as Dave proves in his veg patch. Amongst the very lovely vegetables, Dave has left some veg flowers to grow from last year's crop for all sorts of insects.
So this giant beast it's a parsnip. Most people think of a parsnip as the rooty bit, but I just left 2 in the ground last year, didn't harvest them. And of course they flower in their second year, they're biennials. And that means I can collect the seed. In a few weeks' time, they'll be ready to harvest. So it saves me buying parsnip seed every year.
Yeah.
But aside from giving you seeds, there's a dual advantage of the parsnip because it's really prone to blackfly.
Yeah,
you can see there they are. But also, if you look closely, up there is a little cluster of ladybird eggs. The flowers attract hoverflies, some of which have larvae that eat aphids. So between the ladybirds and the hoverflies and the soldier beetles and the earwigs and all sorts of other predators that are attracted in by the aphids and then will help to keep their population under control so they never become too common and they never spread onto my runner beans over there, which you can see are completely free of pests. And I haven't sprayed any chemicals at all. I'm just relying on these insects to come to my aid.
There's leek flowers and comfrey here too, to attract more insect predators that will pollinate his veg while they're at it.
It's all about balance, about giving nature a chance to do its own thing and not trying to control everything all the time.
Sometimes nature knows better than we do, perhaps.
I think she does.
Having water in the garden supports a huge number of aquatic insects. But probably the easiest thing that we can all do to help involves the lawn.
I would feel slightly stupid doing this. I don't know why. I've done it thousands of times.
It's graceful.
This old lawn is mowed just once a year, and lots of insects have moved in.
So let's have a look what we've got in here. Look at this.
Oh, wow.
It's just kind of alive with little moths. So this is a green shield bug, a fully grown one. These are rather handsome. Here we have a swollen-thighed flower beetle. It's fairly obvious why it's called a swollen-thighed flower beetle, because it has these...
Thunder thighs.
Yeah, it's like the Chris Hoy of the beetle world. This is a lacewing. These are beautiful insects, a lovely kind of lime green colour, and the larvae are voracious aphid predators. They have these big curved scimitar kind of jaws. They stab into the aphids and suck the juice out of them and then leave this kind of shriveled husk behind.
Nice.
Yeah, lovely.
For something so beautiful.
The insect world is charming.
All these insects are here because of the longer grass.
If this was mown like a traditional lawn, you'd have almost none of this insect life, because every time you mow, you go through, not only do you get rid of all the vegetation, but you actually suck up and macerate all the poor insects. In long grass, if you leave it, you get all sorts of stuff. Plus the seeds then provide food for birds later in the year and voles, and there's a whole kind of ecosystem springs into life just by stopping mowing your lawn.
Even leaving a little patch at the end of your garden would do. So actually, gardening for insects is really easy.
It involves stepping back, stopping mowing the lawn, stopping spraying pesticides, and giving things a chance to recover. By doing a little bit less, us gardeners can do so much more to turn the tide on declining insects.
I think the really interesting takeaway from that is that it's not what you do to help wildlife that matters so much as what you don't do. Just do less. Now, this greenhouse is fantastic for me as a gardener and also for the kitchen, because above all, this is going to produce food for us to eat. And I've got a whole series of salad crops that I sowed, some before Christmas, which are now ready to be planted out to give lovely salads through spring in the Hungry Gap, but also to use the space. Now, I've got here cultivated rocket, which is not the same as the wild rocket that you tend to find in supermarkets and restaurants. It's got very unserrated leaves, is buttery and soft, very peppery and absolutely delicious. I've got spinach, which we can eat as a salad crop. I've got mitsuba, which is a Japanese green, and I've also got endive. And all of these I will plant in the greenhouse, and they'll grow fast under the light and the heat, but also plant some outside. They will grow slower, so we can stagger the harvest. And this is where growing in plugs is really good, because you have one seed per plug, and when you take it out, you can see that you've got a good root system that holds the soil together. And you just make a little hole, and I use my fingers, pop it in, and that's it. And those roots will grow out into the soil. So I'm spacing them a good 6 inches apart. Maximum chance to get all the moisture and the nutrients they need to develop a strong root system, and that means they will produce masses of leaves. And if you get your timing right and the weather's good, you can sometimes get 3 or even 4 harvests from each plant. And if you haven't got a greenhouse, then you can make these early crops grow a bit quicker by having a cloche, or even putting some fleece over them. And that will protect them from the worst of the cold, and they'll just grow that little bit quicker. What are you doing in there? Whoops, I just planted your tail. I have to. How about that? That's quite a funny place to be. I shall plant all of them till we've filled the whole bed, and then what's left over will be planted outside. Now, obviously, if you haven't sown seed already, you have to buy plants, but you can do that. Go to a garden centre or nurseries, they sell young plants, then plant those out. And I would just stress again, don't be tempted to plant them too close. Now, while I'm doing this, we've got a chance to have another look at a very special garden. It didn't have a greenhouse, but it had an awful lot else, which was quite surprising given that it's on a boat.
I think of my garden as a bit of floating wilderness, and it's teaching me all the time about the natural world in so many different ways. My name's Poppy Okocha, and I live here on our boat with my boyfriend and our three-legged cat in central London on the Grand Union Canal, and we've lived here for about 4 years now. Being on the water itself just makes you feel so connected to nature and the seasons. So for us, the boat is really a kind of floating oasis, and along with the plants and all the insects that it attracts, it really feels like we're kind of like a little wildlife pontoon. This is where I grow a lot of plants. I grow plants inside the boat, on the roof, and on the deck where I am now. On the deck, I predominantly grow herbs and flowers, just because it's lovely to be able to access them quickly from the kitchen, which is just through here. On the boat, I have to be really aware of the fact that on the roof especially, there's a bit of a wind situation. As well as the wind, I also have the willows to contend with, which unfortunately cast so much shade. We actually coppice them every 2 years, but this year is a no coppice year, and so we're operating in quite deep shade towards the north side of the boat. So I have to kind of stack everything up facing south out of the reach of the willow shade. When I first came to London, I started a career as a model, and I was incredibly busy doing a lot of travelling, and in the end I got quite exhausted and burnt out, both mentally and physically, and that's really what kind of led me into seeking a more grounded lifestyle. Plants became a way of healing because it's just so calming and grounding and really slows you down, because you kind of tune into this slower seasonal pace that plants seem to exist in. The boat is covered in plants, and it sometimes becomes a bit of a battle between human space and plant space. At the moment, unfortunately, I think the humans are only just winning. I really like to explore plants that have uses, because, of course, it's lovely for them to be beautiful, but when you're limited for space like I am, it's lovely to really kind of get a yield from everything. I grow ginger. Now, these are some ginger plants that I propagated this year. I purchase organic ginger root from the supermarket and soak it in water till it hydrates. They usually then sprout these little green bits that they're, telling me they're ready to go. And I put them in some nice moist, rich compost, and it can take a while. I mean, this guy has been really slow to the party. It took about 4 weeks for these to come up, and then this guy 8 to 10 weeks even. But I find it a really rewarding propagation process, because I use ginger in my cooking all the time, and it's really lovely to see what the plant actually looks like in real life rather than only ever interacting with the root. I love plants because I feel that when you really start to connect with them, you develop this kind of symbiotic relationship. So you're caring for the plants, and in return, the plant cares for you. The plants on our boat I don't grow necessarily to sustain us. Growing to meet self-sufficiency I don't think would necessarily be possible on a boat. but I do like to explore a connection to try and understand where food comes from and just experiencing plants through their different life stages. And that just brings you one step closer to understanding the plants and understanding where our food comes from. And for me, that's just like a really magic experience. Living on the boat has made me very aware of the resources we use, and so for me it's really important to integrate sustainable growing practices into the growing process, because if I'm working with nature, working with plants, then I want to be doing the best by nature and by the plants. I absolutely love tomatoes, and I have this dream of being able to grow enough tomatoes to be able to jar them up for winter months. So on the roof I'm growing 3 varieties. I'm growing Mini Belle, Gardener's Delight, and a beefsteak tomato called Marmande. With my tomatoes, I grow a lot of companion plants to support their growth and to repel pests and disease, as well as to attract pollinators. So the plants I grow are borage, nasturtiums and basil. And some of them even enhance the flavour of the tomatoes. They're all also edible as well as being beautiful, so they're doubly useful in a small space. There's a little bumblebee in the flower. These are my Gardener's Delight tomatoes, and they're cordon variety, so they're going to need a bit of support, which I'm going to give them from some stakes cut from the willows. And I love that these stakes come from literally just here. They're not imported, they're just such local material, and it's obviously free. So that's a fantastic use from the willow trees. And then I'm just going to pop my tomato up against the arch, like so. And that will provide a nice bit of support through the rest of the growing season. The last few years I've spent on this boat have really been the beginning of my journey with plants, which is funny because I haven't had land to work. It's brought to me the understanding that plants can survive in so many situations, including on a boat, and it's always possible to grow a garden no matter where you are. And this garden is a dream. I'm really lucky to have it.
I think there's something very romantic about houseboats. And if you can have a houseboat where you grow things too and have a garden, that's romantic and practical. I don't know if sowing tomatoes is romantic, but it's certainly practical, and I love growing them and I love eating them. And you can sow tomatoes now and you will get a perfectly good harvest later on in summer. So that is an ordinary seed compost, and I'm starting with a variety called Black Crim. They're quite a large tomato, and the reason I grow them is because they taste fantastic. If I get 10 good plants from these, and each one gives me 10 to 20 good tomatoes, that's well worth growing, and for the cost of a packet of seeds is actually very good value. Press those down to make good contact without compacting the soil, and then very lightly cover them. That'll do. Label it, water it, and then put it somewhere warm. A windowsill is fine as long as there's a radiator underneath it. And as soon as you see the seedlings appear, if you are on a windowsill, remember to turn them, because they need all the light they can get. But they should appear in about 10 days' time, and then be ready to prick out in about 3 to 4 weeks' time, and then grow them on. I've got another variety here that I'm going to sow called Sun Gold. They're small, they're a cherry tomato, and they are easy to grow. And I will grow these both indoors and outdoors in my veg plot. But you don't need a veg plot or an allotment to grow any vegetables. You can grow them in your borders, as we found out from the film that's been sent to us from one of our viewers in Cheshire.
This is my small suburban garden in East Cheshire. This year we want to grow as many of our own fruit and vegetables as we can. We want to try and utilise the space in the borders we have that normally I would be growing annuals in, but this year we're going to be growing vegetables. Our garden's pretty small. It's got 6-foot high fences, it's west facing, it's full of children's play equipment. It didn't sit right to just carry on as if nothing had changed. So in a bid to keep my mind more occupied, it was time to start growing vegetables more seriously. I'm mixing little clusters of things like French beans, peas, beetroot, and even these red cabbages amongst the perennials, in the hope the garden will be both beautiful and productive without taking away the space we need for our young children. Our garden is far from perfect. Slugs help themselves regularly, and with 2 small children, chickens and a dog, things get dug up, pulled up, trodden on or squashed on quite a regular basis. But if we can do something that puts food on our table ourselves and smiles on our faces along the way, I think we'll have done some good.
I love what Laura's doing, and of course it's in a long and very honourable tradition of cottage gardening, where everything from decorative plants, edible plants, medicinal plants are all grown cheek by jowl in a glorious jumble. And it doesn't matter where you grow your veg, whether it's next to a delphinium or a beetroot, they're going to taste just as good. Now you'll notice there's a lot of bare space here on the mound, and that's because over the last month or so I have been digging up all the plants. And this is all part of creating the space for a new project that we're doing up here. I'm going to tell you all about later. But I've got one more plant that I really do need to move, and that's this wisteria. Now I would say that moving a wisteria for the sake of it is a bad idea. However, this has got to go, so I thought I'd try and keep it, grow it on in a pot for a year, and if it survives, I'll find a home for it. But the first thing to do if you're moving any climber, it doesn't matter if it's a wisteria, a rose, a honeysuckle, a clematis, is cut it back. And that's because when you dig it up, however careful you are, you're going to lose a lot of the roots. And also inflict a terrible trauma onto the plant. It really is a dramatic shock to the system. So the less top growth those roots have to support, the greater the chance of survival. Now, wisteria do have quite extensive roots, but I don't know how big they'll be. So I'm going to start on the assumption that they're really right out here and dig round it. The more I can get out, the better. The feeding roots of any plant, whether it's a climber, a tree, a shrub, are relatively shallow. They go sideways rather than down. The roots that go down deep are mainly to secure the plant. There you are. These are the feeder roots, these small ones, and these are the really important ones, and it's most important thing is to not let them dry out. So we need to get that into a pot very quickly. It is important that as well as potting it up, that I give it the best of conditions. Not too wet, not too dry, not too hot, not too cold. And in about a year's time, if it starts putting on plenty of healthy growth, then I'll plant it out. Now, that's not a job that you do too often, but here are some other ones that you definitely can be getting on with this weekend. If you're growing red currants, white currants or gooseberries, now is the time to prune them. They all bear their fruit on old wood, so the new wood from last year can be cut back to let light and air into the plant and providing the perfect conditions for fruit production. Start by removing all inward growing shoots and then reduce the remaining growth by about a third, leaving a nice open goblet shape with the old growth forming a permanent structure. Late flowering clematis, such as Clematis viticella, produce all their flowers on new growth, so it's best to prune away all of last year's. Cut back boldly to a couple of buds, and these will produce the new shoots with this year's flowers. And avoid the problem of bare stems with all the flowers at the top of the plant out of sight. Now is the best time to sow tender and half-hardy annuals such as zinnia, tithonia and cosmos. Fill a seed tray with any peat-free compost and sow the seeds thinly, covering them with a sprinkling of soil and pressing them gently to ensure that they make intimate contact with the compost. Water them and keep them moist, putting them somewhere warm and bright to germinate. Now, the reason why I've taken the wisteria out and almost all the other plants is because we are making a big change here on the mound. We're going to build a summer house, and you can see we've got canes up to show where the corners are. That's the front corner. We've got another one there, and then these are the back two corners here and here. And the reason why we're doing that is not because we didn't like the planting, I did, but this is one of those parts of the garden where the parts have never really amounted to a satisfactory sum. So we're going to build a summer house where we can come in the evening. It'll be using very simple materials, recycled wherever possible. It'll be cheap, it'll be cheerful, and it'll be fun. Now, I will share the stages with you as we go through it, but it'll be weeks and probably months because we're in no particular hurry. And that is it for today. Don't forget that on Sunday morning the clocks go forward, so we've got another lovely hour of light in the evening. For me, that's one of the best days of the year. Oh, there's Patty barking. Okay, join me here at Longmeadow next Friday, but until then, bye-bye.